It's 6 o'clock, so we're live. Hi, everyone.
It says we're still in a practice session, so I don't know if we're live yet.
We are live.
Okay.
We're live inside of Zoom, and now I'm gonna set it up right now.
Yep.
Weird. Mine keeps saying we're in a practice session. Okay.
You're in a different reality than us.
Well, it is 1 a.m.
Yeah,
so
that is true. So you are in a different reality.
I'm in an entirely different reality.
Yeah. Hi, everyone that's joining. We'll be getting started shortly. Please be patient while we allow everyone to get on the call. And I'm going to set up the stream for Facebook. So we're going to start in about 2 minutes. If you have questions for our guest, you can add them to the Q&A box. So everybody just hang in there for a bit.
And it would be great to hear from you where you're dialing in from. So add your name and your location in the chat box so we can all see. I'm in Prague, and I'm dialing in on a nice spring winter day where it's been snowing and sunny all day.
We're hitting the end of the cherry blossom season. So we had like a really nice week of cherry blossoms, and then the rain came. So all the blossoms are gone.
The cherry blossoms are just coming out now, but then we had a 3 centimeters of snow this morning that then melted in an hour. So it was quite exciting.
It's a lot of snow.
It was fast and furious. We have people from Guatemala.
Ooh, hi, Ki. Glad to see you.
Barcelona, Spain, Stuttgart, Paris, Provence. Lots of people coming in.
All over the world.
Yep.
Awesome.
Erin, tell us where you are.
I am in very dark South Korea right now. I am from New Mexico, so gotta represent that vote.
That's right.
All the spicy food.
Nancy, I don't know if Nancy is looking at the chat, but Connie Board, who a very active Democratic Pride member, is saying hello, not from Martha's Vineyard.
All right. We are live now on Facebook.
Excellent.
Okay. Ready to roll?
Ready to roll.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us as we mark Sexual Assault Awareness Day with a very special panel of speakers. I'm Ann Hesse, and it's my privilege to lead the Democrats Abroad Global Women's Caucus. I'm joined in facilitating this discussion by Marnie Delaney, leader of the GWC Violence Against Women Action Team, which has gotten off to a fast start this year. Also joining us is Erin Watson, co-chair of the Global Veterans and Military Families Caucus, co-sponsors of this evening's event. Angela Fobbs, Global Black Caucus Chair, and Julia Bryan, our DA Global Chair, will also be participating in the discussion with our 3 guests, Nancy Parrish, Don Christensen, and Paula Coughlin. Please note that we will be gathering questions for our speakers from the chat box on Zoom and on Facebook, where we're streaming live. So you're welcome to type in your questions as we go along. Now I'd like to hand off to Julia Bryan, who is approaching the close of her very, very successful 4-year run as our Democrats Abroad Global Chair. Julia?
Well, thank you so much, Ann. It's always wonderful to be on webinars with you, and I really appreciate it. This is such an important subject that we're talking about today, and we're actually at a really important moment of time too, where we, as voters and constituents, can help shape legislation that will address violence against women, as well as move other very important pieces of democratic legislation through Congress. And I just have to say, I cannot say too many times how this moment was brought to you and to us by the work that we've all done, by the work that we did to get out the vote, by the impact of the vote, our vote abroad across the United States, and in very close races in Georgia, Arizona, and Wisconsin. We know that our votes made the difference in the elections in those 3 states for President Biden and Vice President Harris. And we also helped win the Senate by triggering a runoff election for John Ossoff in Georgia. So please take a moment to understand the impact of your vote and know that you should always vote in every general election so that you can make sure that your votes, that we're making that impact every year. Right now, we have a short window of time until the 2022 elections. While we work on legislation in Congress and also in the states, we're already planning for next year here at Democrats Abroad. There are tight races that are going to be happening across the United States in the House, of course, and then in the Senate as well. And I just want to bring to your attention the fact that 6 of the 7 swing Senate states that we're looking at right now, of 6 of those states, we have won state level races recently. So you can imagine our focus on expanding our message to help as many Americans as possible get their ballot request in and then vote is really important for us. The last thing I just note is that we're working a lot on legislation. We are working on at the state level on voter legislation that will protect our vote and also expand it. We're trying to enfranchise more voters in New Jersey. We're trying to allow voters in New York to get their ballots back by email. We're working in Texas to add amendments that will help protect Americans abroad. And we are also working in Congress. We're working on amendments to S1, the For the People Act, to make it to enfranchise more voters who currently are not allowed to vote, even though they're US citizens. Their state residency laws don't allow them to vote. So we're doing all of that. It's really important. Please keep it, stay tuned about this work, and we'll make sure that we keep you involved in reaching out to your legislators. So with that, I'm going to hand the mic back to Anne. Thank you for that opportunity to tell everybody what we're up to and why it's going to be so important for us all to get our votes back next year.
Okay, Marnie, do you want to set us up a little bit for this event? Your mic. Mike.
Sorry about that. So our guests today are the founder, chair, president, and treasurer of Protect Our Defenders, the preeminent national human rights organization dedicated to ending sexual violence, victim retaliation, misogyny, sexual prejudice, and racism in the military, and also to combat a culture that has allowed it to persist. Organization, it rapidly became clear to those of us on the Violence Against Women team that it has enormous significance for our work and for the members of many of the Democrats Abroad caucuses, actually for the organization as a whole. Specifically, our conversations made apparent that the Military Justice Improvement Act, as proposed by Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, is critical to finally providing real answers to the real problems of violence within the military. Because it is so membership, and because answering this problem is addressed within our most recent platform, we've drafted a resolution we hope will be taken up for consideration at the Democrats Abroad annual meeting to signify the importance of our support for Senator Gillibrand's legislation. We are looking forward to exploring all the ways that we can support the work of Protect Our Defenders. And after hearing our guests speak, I know you'll share our desire to make a difference for a group of fellow citizens who deserve much better treatment. Back to you.
Okay, now we'd like to tell you a little bit about our 3 wonderful guests. We'll just touch on a little bit of the highlights of their incredible achievements for now, otherwise we'd be here all night. So Nancy Parrish is an active leader in community and public affairs. She's devoted much of her life to issues of social justice and human rights. In 2011, Parrish founded Protect Our Defenders, POD, and by 2014, the New York Times described it as the nation's preeminent advocacy group on behalf of the victims of sexual assault in the military. In recognition of her work with Protect Our Defenders, Parrish was named the 2016 recipient of the Ivan Allen Jr. Prize for Social Courage, which this year, by the way, went to the famous Dr. Fauci, just to give you a sense of the great esteem people have for our guest. Parrish was also a founding co-chair of Human Rights Watch Northern California chapter. She has worked with President and Mrs. Carter in support of their international humanitarian work at the Carter Center and served 2 terms as as the development trustee of UCSF Friends of the Department of Psychiatry's Hospital Board, as chair of the Ringling Museum, and as vice president of the Children's Guardian Fund Board of Sarasota. Now, Erin, would you give us some background on Colonel Christensen?
Of course, I'd be happy to. Colonel Don Christensen is a retired member of the United States Air Force, and between 2010 and 2014 served as one of the chief prosecutors. Over the course of his 23-year career in the military, he has been a trial counsel, defense counsel, and military judge. He has tried over 150 cases as a courts martial and been part of 100+ trials as a military judge. So been a very busy person. He is born in Sturgis, South Dakota, and got his law degree from Marquette University Law School. He is a third-generation Air Force officer who received his commission as a second lieutenant through ROTC and entered service in 1991. In his role as the president of Protect Our Defenders, he has appeared regularly on major broadcasts and print media to advocate for the rights of victims, to share his perspective and experience as a legal expert within the military justice system. And he has provided compelling testimony in the recent Senate hearings on sexual violence in the military. Colonel Christensen has received many awards for his service, including the Legion of Merit, the Meritorious Service Medal, the Air Force Commemorative Commendation Medal, and the Air Force Achievement Medal. So he's has a very, very impressive background, and we're very glad to talk to him today.
Okay, and our third guest is retired U.S. Navy Lieutenant Paula Coughlin. She served in the U.S. Navy as a helicopter pilot and was one of the earliest women in aviation to become flight deck and maintenance officer qualified. While serving as aide-de-camp at the Naval Air Test Station in 1991, her role as a whistleblower in the infamous Tailhook Convention ended her aviation career. But Coughlin pushed forward, working to rectify the inequities in military policies for women in aviation and combat. She is unwavering in her efforts to make positive changes. She's testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee, met with former President George H. Bush, the Secretary of Defense, and more. Recently, she forced the House Armed Services Committee to hold open hearings on the sexual abuse scandal at Lackland Air Force Base. In recognition of her leadership in modernizing the roles of women in the military, she was honored as 1992 Woman of the Year by Vanity Fair. Coughlin was highlighted in a feature-length film, She Stood Alone, as well as the Academy Award-nominated documentary Invisible War, and most recently in the historical series Retro Report with the New York Times. So now we are ready to hear from our special guests. We're really thrilled to have you all with us. So Paula, the floor is now yours.
If I could interrupt, actually, I'll begin. And then I'll move it to Paula, and then to Paula, and then to Don.
That's great. Okay, thank you, Nancy. Nancy,
sure, and,
take the stage.
Thank you very much, Julia, and to the entire organization. Thank you so much for your interest and for the opportunity, Marnie. I really have enjoyed working with you these past several weeks as we put all this together. It's really an honor to be here. Thank you very much again for your interest. Paula, Don, and I are going to provide a 30-minute presentation about our status of driving systemic legal and culture change for survivors of sexual assault, for women in general, and the people of color in our military. We truly are at a once-in-a-lifetime moment to drive social change. For the first time ever, the President of the United States declared his support for our signature reform. That's Military Justice Improvement Act in the Senate. That is Rep. Spears' I Am Vanessa Guillen Act in the House. And in April of 2020, then candidate Biden, when asked by me publicly if he supported our reform, he passionately responded, yes, yes, yes. And we now have a majority of both the Senate and the House of Representatives. But he and they need our help to get this over the finish line. But before we get into the details, I'd like to share a 2-minute video to provide you a little more context of the issue and who we are and what we do.
Every day since initiating the sexual harassment complaint, I asked myself if I did the right thing by reporting.
After I reported my sexual assault, I was court-martialed. My assailant was given immunity to testify against me.
After I reported, my commander kicked me out with a personality disorder.
I was discharged with no medical benefits, no college money, and no career.
I blamed myself and even doubted my sanity until I realized reprisals happen to the majority of military survivors who report.
Protect Our Defenders helped me when no one else would.
My attorneys at POD Law Center were a bright spot. They guided me through very dark and troubling times.
Without your legal services, I would not have been able to go up against the Army criminal investigators.
The injustices from the Navy and the Department of Defense would have continued.
When I filed on my own to have my discharge reviewed, I lost. Due to the fact that you found me an attorney, they're changing my discharge.
You helped me gather the strength I needed to continue my fight for justice.
Now the voice I thought I had lost forever keeps getting stronger.
After winning my case, I can now help other veterans.
Together, we can ensure that all of our service members have access to a fair and impartial system of justice.
I have to say I get emotional every time I watch it. You know, in 2010, Jackie Spear, who was then a new member of Congress and a friend, shared with permission letters she was receiving from military sexual assault survivors. I'm not naive, but simply put, they were shocking. I ended up speaking with 200 plus survivors over a period of 4 to 5 months. Rep. Spear, as many of you may know, became a national leader in Congress along with Senator Gillibrand on this issue. And I thought about what I could do. So I looked for an organization to help. I couldn't find one. And I realized that my life experience had led me to that moment, that maybe I could make a difference. I put the pieces together to effectively advocate for those countless young women and men who needed a voice. So in 2011, I founded Protect Our Defenders with a small band of friends and a group of survivors who trusted us enough to share their stories through short form documentary. And so with the help of my filmmaker daughter, Rebecca, who with her small team traveled the country and documented these stories. Today, we're a non-hierarchical, scrappy, agile, lean, and efficient organization. We combine advocacy, research, policy reform, and pro bono legal services to drive change. In fact, our groundbreaking 2020 Racial Disparities in Military Justice Report, Part 2, detailed how the Air Force had tried to suppress evidence of systemic racism for years. This drove investigations, congressional hearings, unprecedented activism by active duty members, admission by military leaders, and successful legislative action. You know, misogyny, discrimination, sexual harassment, and assault are rampant and ineffectively addressed in our military. These issues impact a large swath of the most disadvantaged Americans. The US military is arguably the most powerful institution in the world. According to numerous studies, its culture and practices demonstrate a systemic lack of concern, even hostile attitude toward female employees and sexual assault survivors. The hostile climate is so pervasive that it creates an unsafe work environment that adversely affects women's and survivors' ability to function and rise in their careers, often driving them out of service, out of their livelihood. It is too often life-destroying. For many, joining is a critical path to achieve social mobility, offering a good paying job or an education that's otherwise not available to them, especially for Black women who join at a higher rate than all other demographic groups. As the world's largest employer and an oversized socioeconomic influencer, addressing these concerns impact gender, racial, and LGBTQ populations. This is also a massive public health issue with important implications for American society and economic opportunity. Service women have much in common with the vulnerable population of women workers in the private sector. They too suffer a severe power disparity. They are not allowed to leave their job, their residence, or their social environment. Upon joining the military, they relinquish basic human and constitutional rights. They uniquely cannot sue their employer. Their right to speak publicly is severely restricted. Service members, their families, civilian employees, and other civilians raped by service members do not have access to a professionally administered and unbiased justice system. Don will speak more to this. The good news is the military's authoritarian and hierarchical structure can swiftly drive policy and behavior reform when provoked by the public and civilian elected leaders. Historically, social justice reform initiated in the military has often prefigured progress in the broad civilian society, a la Truman integrating the armed forces, Obama lifting the ban on LGBTQ openly serving. Society changed, laws changed. So there is real reason to believe we can make this happen and make it happen now. With that, I will now pass it along to Paula, who will share her own very personal and insightful vantage point on this issue. Paula has been selfless and tireless to this effort. And I must say, we've become really good friends, and that has meant so much to me. Paula, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you for such a nice introduction. It's true that Nancy and I have become really good friends, and it's probably been the best outcome of working with Protect Our Defenders and working with Dawn and everyone in the organization. It is astoundingly refreshing to be invited to speak to a group of such esteemed leaders that can really affect a change. And I appreciate the opportunity to share with you some of my experiences. And the point that I would like to impart here is that my experiences, when I went through my sexual assault and the investigation, and I use that term loosely, and the whole adjudication process through the military, was so significantly flawed that I left the military with nothing but some serious post-traumatic stress disorder and debt, actually. But when Nancy approached me in 2012, I had kind of gone underground since Tailhook, had some children and a husband and all of those things that were trying to make order out of my life. But what the underlying theme in my life that was not being addressed was the victimization and having a voice to really try and use what happened to me to make life better for the women and the men in the military coming behind me. So when Nancy approached me, and that's almost a little bit of a funny story because I was pretty paranoid about anybody contacting me about Tailhook, but she prevailed, and we have made some astounding accomplishments. And I say we, but I really mean Protect Our Defenders. And I mean, Nancy has always been the strategist that helped move this whole effort forward. Some of the first things that we worked on together was just looking back at how I was treated as a victim and understanding that that same mistreatment through the retribution and the significantly flawed military justice system, how it personally victimized me again. And those are some of the most significant accomplishments for victims of military sexual assault that Protect Our Defenders has been able to provide. And first and foremost is that when I went through my whole investigation, there was no way as a victim I was gonna ever get an attorney. The military didn't believe victims needed an attorney. So I was fortunate that I had a friend who was married to an attorney, and I was able to get my own attorney. But that my attorney wasn't even allowed to come into evidentiary hearings because she wasn't military. That was one of the most difficult and obvious disparities, is that the victim has no rights and has no right to an attorney. And now we've, in 2014, Protect Our Defenders addressed that specifically. And now we have a strong and growing program of providing victim counsel. And these are things that so personally affected me as having no advocate. And now to know that this kind of help is happening for our military survivors is tremendous. In one of the evidentiary hearings that I went to, they didn't even present any evidence against the defendant. It was all about me. And it was really what we would call it in a grand jury hearing, but in the military, it's called an Article 32. And the way that that Article 32 was abused to build a case for the defense and tear down and intimidate the victim was addressed by Protect Our Defenders. And again, we were able to eliminate the abuses of the grand jury hearing and all of these small pieces, I call them line items, that would go into law through the Defense Authorization Act, took a tremendous effort from Nancy and Don Christensen and the whole Protect Our Defenders team. And as these changes started to make their way down into the fleet, it brought an awareness to military leaders. Some of the other changes that probably would have saved my life a long time ago. One of the most galling aspects of my entire military justice experience was I finally was invited to Quantico to meet the military convening authority that was going to review all evidence and decide whether to go forward with any kind of a trial or a court-martial. And I met, and he later became the Commandant of the Marine Corps. And I met this General Franks in his office, and he explained to me that he didn't say he had read any interviews or had read any evidence from the evidentiary hearings, but he did explain to me that he met my perpetrator and my perpetrator's minister And based on that conversation, I had the wrong guy, and he dismissed the entire case. So you could go through an entire investigation process and the convening authority could decide not to move forward based on the good soldier concept, like good military character. This guy could not have done that. I met him. I met his minister. So in 2014, Protect Our Defenders was able to include that as a line item and eliminate the good military character defense in sexual assault cases. And there were just so many things that have been successful in changing the way the victim is protected and the way that the military justice system is working. But what we really still keep coming down to is bigger changes in the military system have to happen. And that's what I think we're right at the cusp of seeing happen here. We've changed and I really need to let Dawn do the more specific explanations of some of these tremendous changes in the military justice system. But the idea that you could have a real jury, because that doesn't exist right now in the military. The selection of jury members is basically a kangaroo court. And that jury trial could up until recently be vacated by the commanding officer. So a jury comes to a conclusion of guilty, makes a recommendation of sentencing, which is pretty random in itself. And then that perpetrator's commanding officer or the convening authority that's overseeing the whole thing within the chain of command can just dismiss it. And I think Dawn could probably speak more personally about that experience, but that one item highlights the tremendous hurdle we have in front of us right now, is that the commanding officer still, the chain of command still has complete control over the outcome of whether a victim is ever believed, if there's a report written, if there's an investigation done, if there's any kind of actual adjudication process pursued at all. So when we talk about the biggest changes that we are facing right now and the opportunity that we have right now, I think it really does come down to understanding we need professional prosecutors and to remove the chain of command from the whole adjudication process. And that's where we have to ask for help. And I think I'm in a good audience here, because what we really need is our elected officials, especially Senate, to understand that this Military Justice Improvement Act, where we remove the chain of command from the adjudication process, is what has to happen. And these senators that may or may not care at all about sexual assault need to understand it's a bigger picture. It's a bigger problem. It is about our military being completely compromised by criminal activity, and nobody really gives a crap. They just press on. So they don't understand the scope of the problem, and they don't understand the ramifications. Not just personally having been trounced by the military justice system, but seeing the scope of the problem has been my education since meeting Nancy. And I know that we are so close to making this improvement. It's really, really exciting to get to talk to all of you and help you understand what our work is and how you can help us. So I look forward to any questions that you have. And I am going to hand this off to, I have a video that will help you, a short video that I think we've got queued up that will explain some of the best and brightest things that Colonel Christensen has done for us. And I look forward to any questions that I can answer for you later. Dawn, I think we're going to do the video now, and then Dawn's up.
CNN breaking news.
As the Supreme Court begins its new term today, it will decide whether to take up a landmark case on how the military
prosecutes rape.
One of Harmony Allen's instructors raped and beat her in 2000. A military jury sentenced Collins to 16 and a half years in prison in 2017, but he served just 2.
They get their rank back, they get their benefits back.
Don Christensen was chief prosecutor for the Air Force and now advocates for victims of military sexual assault.
Sends a bad message to the entire force that this is something we don't care about.
When looking at different aspects of systemic racism, the military is not excluded. Retired Air Force Colonel Don Christensen, president of Protect Our Defenders, telling lawmakers today,
Black service members were punished at a significantly higher rate than white service members.
More than twice as likely to get court-martialed or prosecuted.
Protect Our Defenders fought to get the military to release the information.
Army Private First Class Vanessa Guillen, the 20-year-old, vanished from Fort Hood, Texas in April. And on Tuesday, human remains were found about 20 miles from the base.
The Army specialist was sexually harassed before she went missing.
Vanessa was terrified of reporting it up the chain of command.
The sexual harassment was coming from her superiors, so her concern was the retaliation.
Interview retired Colonel Don Christensen of the organization Protect Our Defenders.
We need independent prosecutors, independent investigators to give confidence to victims that they'll see justice.
Okay.
Oh, well, thank you, Paula and Nancy, and to everybody in this incredible organization. We really appreciate the time to talk to you today about military sexual assault. And I'm just going to piggyback a little bit on what Paula talked about with accomplishments. At Protect Our Defenders, we have a law center, which we established because we realized there was a real need for attorneys to represent victims throughout the process, whether it's a military justice process or dealing with trying to get their discharges upgraded, or they themselves were being punished after they reported. And as a result of that, we have set up a team of law firms that provide pro bono legal representation to survivors throughout the world. And these law firms are some of the biggest in the country, such as Perkins and Coie and Arnold and Porter. Senior partners at those law firms representing for free young service members who have been sexually assaulted. And as one of the huge benefits of that is we hear stories from survivors about what they're facing. And then we also, based upon my experience as a prosecutor, know a lot of the pitfalls that we have in our justice system. In fact, that's how Nancy and I met in 2013. A commander had overturned a conviction of a very senior fighter pilot. The case I had prosecuted in Aviano Air Base in Italy. And Nancy and I had talked at that time because the victim reached out to Protect Our Defenders to get help. And Paula touched upon this power that commanders had. It was under Article 60 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. It said a commander could overturn a conviction for any reason or no reason at all. Just let that sink in. The commander could overturn a conviction for no reason. And in this case, this senior commander believed that the pilot was a good family man and a colonel select, and as a result of that, he couldn't see him committing a sex offense. We found out later that this good family man had actually been using an F-16 to fly across country to have an adulterous relationship with another woman and impregnated her and born a child out of wedlock, but nonetheless, he was a good family man and his case should be overturned. But that was a case working with the survivor, working with what she had experienced to allow us to get Article 60 overturned. Mental health records. Up until just a few years ago, mental health records of a survivor were routinely turned over to their offender. And if you think about and Paula's raising her hand, that happened to her. And if you think about one of the things that is most abusive to a survivor is having her intimate or his intimate thoughts turned over to the person that has caused this trauma they're going through. So they're talking to the therapist about the trauma, trying to get help. And then not realizing that later that the very person that raped them is going to be able to see the impact they had, and too many of them are enjoying that impact and then using that to attack their credibility. So we were able to strengthen the mental health privilege that in the military had so many exceptions that it was like driving a Mack truck through it. It's still not as good as the average civilian system. There are some that it's better, but for most it's not as good, but it's better. And the thing about our reforms is that we always are dealing with two pushbacks. One, the defense community, which by that I mean the defense council community, which doing their job, they're always trying to find ways around the reforms we've gotten. And so we are constantly playing a chess game with them. Okay, we get this reform, they attack it, they find a loophole, so then we have to get another fix. So we're constantly doing that through the National Defense Authorization Act. But the other is the Department of Defense. By simply refusing to follow the law that Congress has passed. And that's all too often a situation we have. And again, working with the survivor community, we often see where that occurs, where Congress has enacted legislation requiring the Department of Defense to do something, the Department of Defense doesn't follow through. And so, for example, in 2015, Congress passed legislation that required the commander to inform a victim of sexual assault or rape that they had the right to request that civilians prosecute the case instead of the military. Very important right for these survivors. Often there are greater protections in the civilian system. Often they do a better job of prosecution. And I know there's problems with civilians as well. But this was a right they had. But through the survivors we talked to, we were finding that they often weren't told of this right, or the military did everything they could to talk them out of actually invoking the rights that they had. So we were able to go to Representative Speer, say, hey, you know, we're hearing that no one is getting told of this right to ask the military to require the military to ask the civilians to prosecute the case. Representative Speer was able to get the Department of Defense Inspector General to look into this. And what they found was that 80% of the cases, the military either didn't properly inform victims of their rights or didn't document it. And so that's just a constant challenge for us to make sure the military is following through. But, you know, we're like a dog with a bone. We will not let up on them. And it's, the accomplishments that we've accomplished since 2011 are amazing. I cannot think of another small nonprofit organization that can say year after year after year, look at the legislation we've gotten through and look at the impact that. So it speaks a lot to us as an organization. But I do want to talk a little about the military justice system, which is different than any other justice system in the military. And I believe we have two charts, if someone can pull those up for me. All right, so this first chart is the military justice system. It is a cumbersome, bureaucratic, inefficient process. And why is that? Well, the decision-making authority in the military is done by a commander who is not an attorney. For centuries, they were able to do this without much oversight, which created a very abusive process. And then over the years, Congress has put restrictions on the chain of command by requiring legal reviews and legal advice throughout the stage. And so what you see here in the orange, that's the commanders. Everything in blue are lawyers spending time telling non-lawyers what to do, because these commanders have the ultimate authority to determine whether or not a case goes forward, what the charges will be, if charges should be added, if charges should be dismissed, if there's a plea deal, what the plea deal will be, what the conditions of the plea deal are. All of that's made by a commander, and then up until a few years ago, also the ability to overturn a conviction for no reason. So what we see is a very bureaucratic, cumbersome process, and each layer of command is involved in that. But ultimately, it is only a few commanders at the very top that actually have the authority to send a felony level case to trial. So out of the 1.3 million people in the military and the 14,500 commanders, there's 140 generals and admirals that are at the very top of this complex pyramid scheme to make a decision whether or not a case is sent to trial. Now, if you can show me the next slide, please. And this is the civilian system. It's more streamlined. You have a report to go, someone comes forward, makes a report, it's investigated, that investigation is turned over to the prosecutor. Within that prosecution office, they make the decision whether to charge a case or not to charge a case. And if they charge it, it goes to a grand jury or probable cause hearing. And that, as a result of that, either you go to trial or you don't. It's a much more streamlined process. And the center of this is a prosecutor. And that is consistent with the American Bar Association standard that prosecution decisions should be made by licensed attorneys subject to ethics requirements. And the odd thing about this is that the military often champions that they have a better system because, quote, commanders aren't subject to ethics requirements. Now, I don't know if they hear how tone deaf that is to be arguing that you have a better system because there are no ethical standards, but they do. All right, you take the slides out, thank you. So that cumbersome process with the commander at the center of it, not only do you put the least qualified person making complex decisions, but it has a foundation in bias. And what do I mean by that? At the bottom of that, the first commander that is going to be involved always knows the subject of the investigation, the suspect, the person that you think might have committed a crime. That commander always knows that person. And so you start with the bias of knowledge. We have a system of justice that in the civilian world believes in blind justice, that justice should be made based on the facts and the law, not on your knowledge of the person who committed the crime or the victim. But this always starts with that knowledge. And that bias, whether it's the most ethical commander or not, is going to influence the decision-making process rather than a prosecutor who's doesn't know the accused, doesn't know the victim, is looking at the law and the facts. That bias works its way all the way up the chain of command. It's only 140 commanders who make this decision, but within the military, commanders rely on the input that they get from subordinate commanders. So when your foundation, your bedrock of your system is bias, it permeates all the way through the system. And what we know is that most people in the military like the people they serve with. Most commanders like the people they serve with. And I would often said this, it's very easy to prosecute someone you don't like. It's much more difficult to prosecute someone you do. That's why we don't go to parents and ask them whether their child should be prosecuted. But that's really what we're looking at here, is a system that starts with this bias. And as a result of it, if we look at the numbers in the military when it comes to sex assault prosecutions, last year there were 5,699 men and women who stepped forward to law enforcement and said, I was sexually assaulted, which started an investigation. Of that, only 363 went to trial, only 138 resulted in a conviction. This is even worse when you consider that the military has admitted that they consider over 2,000 of these allegations to be substantiated, yet only 363 went to trial. Why do so few cases go to trial? Because the person making the decision doesn't understand sex assault. The average commander and convening authorities never talked to the victim in their life about the issue. And second, that bias. I like the guy. He's a good person. I can't, as Paula said, I talked to him. He's a good guy. He couldn't see him doing it. Look, those of us who have done a lot of sexual assault know that objectively good guys commit sex assault. So that's a problem we have. And as a result, we see very few cases going forward. So how do we fix this? The major legislation looking at that right now in the Senate is the Military Justice Improvement Act, sponsored by Senator Gillibrand of New York. And what it would do is, instead of these 140 senior generals and admirals making prosecution decisions, it would give it to senior military prosecutors like myself, who have years of experience prosecuting these cases, who are going to decide whether someone should be prosecuted or not based on the evidence and on the law. And most importantly, based on their experience of dealing with complex crimes. Trauma impacts survivors in so many ways. And a lot of those ways that it impacts survivors makes it such that a novice who doesn't deal with sexual assault will discount what they're saying. Where someone like myself, who has experienced the impact of trauma told to me through survivors for years and decades, I understand why a survivor would do something that is counterintuitive. I understand why a survivor doesn't always scream out or resist in the way that so many people have stereotypes of how a survivor should act. But a commander who doesn't do this, who rarely ever sees one of these allegations, they will often use the impact of trauma to discount what a survivor says. So the Military Justice Improvement Act is a very surgical legislative fix to making sure that the most qualified people are making these decisions. That is a senior prosecutor. Representative Spears' I Am Vanessa Guillen Act is the House version of this. It has other legislative fixes as well, including giving survivors the right to sue or at least make claims against the military for the damages of sex assault caused by inaction by the military or the sex assault caused by their perpetrator. As Nancy talked about earlier, the military is a unique situation where an employee cannot make a claim against their employer for sexual assault and sexual harassment. But based on a Supreme Court decision from 1950, survivors are barred from making a claim under the Federal Tort Claims Act if they're active duty military, based on the idea, and wrap your head around this for a second, that sexual assault is incident to service. In other words, it's part of your job, basically, if you get sexually assaulted, and therefore you can't make a claim against the government. So that's a very key provision in Rep. Spears' I Am Vanessa Guillen Act. And so where are we today? What is the likelihood of this passing? Well, as Nancy talked about, for the first time ever, we have a commander-in-chief who is on board and has vocally and forcefully said, we need to do this. Why is that important? Well, one, it sends the right message to Congress, who have been willing to side with generals and admirals all too often. But secondly, it tells those generals and admirals that their commander-in-chief has spoken on this issue, and it's time to get on board and stop opposing reform on at Capitol Hill. Most importantly, President Biden has established a commission to look at sexual assault, and not just to look at sexual assault as other commissions have done, but to recommend how best to take this out of the chain of command and create a prosecutor-based military justice system. That has been done by the Independent Review Committee. They are looking at a number of things, one of them accountability, the issue we're talking about, but they're also looking at culture issues, victim services. It's very broad-based. They have a 90-day mission to get a report to the president about this. But for the accountability portion of this, they only have 21 days to send to the Secretary of Defense and the president their recommendations reform. Clock's ticking. They're almost already at 2 weeks of that 21 days. So we should be very rapidly getting a recommendation. I had an opportunity to talk to them last Friday. Very hopeful that we're going to get the appropriate recommendation, and that it's time to professionalize our military justice system by turning this over to prosecutors. So I think we are at an inflection point. We are where we can finally get fundamental reform in military justice, which has been a 10-year struggle for us. It is going to take additional encouragement for people like Jack Reed, who's the chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee, and in the past has opposed this, to get on board. Other people like Senator Kelly, who was newly elected out of Arizona. We don't know what he views this, but he needs to be nudged the right direction. So this is bipartisan support to this. I do not think you can find any other legislation that Ted Cruz and Senator Warren support, that Rand Paul and Senator Sanders support. This has both extremes of the Senate, plus people in the middle like Chuck Grassley who support this, and Senator McConnell supports this. We just need to get a few more senators over the hump on this, and I'm very hopeful. I really think we are at the point where this is going to happen. So thank you for the opportunity to talk, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
Thanks, Don. A quick thing to just wrap up here from our end before we open it up to questions and pass it back to you, Julia. As everyone said, first of all, let me just say, Don has been an incredible leader partner in this effort. And although we met under very stressful circumstances due to survivor Kim Hanks and what she was experiencing and what this general had done in overturning a conviction, but it has been critical and vital to the movement that he chose to give up his career to come and join me in this effort to make change from the outside. So I've said it to him privately and in other settings, but publicly, our partnership has truly been a magical experience in terms of what we've been able to do, and it's an honor and pleasure to work with him. So I want to say that. Let me just say, we are truly at a unique opportunity moment with adequate resources and outreach. We can do this. It's an all hands on deck moment. We've initiated a pledge campaign urging the undecided senators to support our reform in the Senate, because that's where we're moving first. So that's MJIA. As part of the campaign, a handful of survivors are leading an effort to seek support from others. And I want to show you a little 60-second snippet on the kind of social media effort we're undertaking. So let me stop for a second and show that video, and then we'll all wrap it up and send it back to you.
Hi, I'm Harmony Allen, and I need your help. I am taking my case to the United States Supreme Court. After being raped by my instructor at Shepherd Air Force Base when I was just 19 years old, I experienced nearly 2 decades of retaliation and inaction before my rapist was convicted, only to be set free by a legal loophole. Survivors of sexual assault and harassment in the military are disregarded all too often. At Protect Our Defenders, we are building a filibuster-proof coalition of 60 senators to put military justice in the hands of professionals. I will fight as hard as I can to ensure other victims of military sexual assault get justice. Please join me. Go to protectourdefenders.com/Senate.
So that's just an example of, oh my God, I think, did I lose you here? There we go. I thought I lost you for a second, guys. That's just an example of our efforts. We need just a handful more of moderate Democrats and a few more Republicans to get to the filibuster-proof 60. And this is where you come in. I expect a number of you have supported members who support We Need. You can look at our website, and I'm going to put the link over in the chat section, and I'll also provide it to Marnie. And you can look there and see where who has publicly supported. And I will say there have been a few members who have privately told us they are with us, where we cannot disclose who they are. But what I'm asking those of you who are watching today and could pass this even on to others is that if you could look at our website and see who's undecided, and then personally contact me. I don't care how many of you there are. We have the means to absorb it and to disperse you into, and educate you, disperse you into where you could be of most help. I want to learn about who you may know or who you've supported, and how you can reach out to them, and where we're at with that member. So with that, I would like to turn it back to you all. And as I said, I'll put it in the chat line so you can have the link as well.
I can't even begin to tell you how impressive it is to listen to you and how impressive it is to see what you've accomplished. And I think it's just, it's evidence of what people with passion can do, and with to all of you. And it's very personal in the world. I mean, this is, you know, if 1 in 3 people are having this experience, I think we've got a problem. And it's touched just about everybody I know. So I thank you. I thank you. I watched the hearings, Colonel Christensen, when you spoke before the Senate, testified before the Senate Armed Forces Committee 2 weeks ago. I struggle with why is anybody against this? And I think the 2 reasons I heard from one senator as he set it up were that really the problem is prevention, which doesn't seem like a real answer to this issue. But the other thing that struck me as odd was that he compared violence in the military to violence on a college campus, and basically said it's pretty much the same. You know, that's what you expect. And first of all, I'm sort of not expecting from the military what I would expect from the frats. So that already struck me, but I found those failure disasters. And so I thought maybe you can tell us why anybody is against this and what arguments they use.
Yeah, thank you. That's an excellent question. In fact, I just talked to a reporter about an hour ago from Washington Post about this very issue. She had the same question. I think a lot of it's just inertia. The military has traditionally always opposed reforms, and those can be social reforms, those can be military tactic reforms. You know, we talk about military tactics, you know, going from a horse army cavalry to a mechanized cavalry was opposed at that time by the people who were horse people. If you look at the Navy, going from a battleship Navy to an aircraft carrier Navy, the people who were battleship people opposed the aircraft carrier as, you know, that wasn't a real weapon system, you know, it's the battleship. But if you look at social justice issues, opposition to integration of Black service members as equals into the military, not segregated, had been opposed for decades. And as even after President Truman ended segregation, generals and admirals were still speaking out publicly saying how it's going to ruin good order and discipline. If you look at more recently, they use that same good order and discipline scare tactic when talking about any don't ask, don't tell. General Amos, who was the Commandant of the Marine Corps, testified that getting rid of don't ask, don't tell would destroy good order and discipline. We shouldn't do it while we're in combat. And then after it went through and there wasn't any impact, 4 months later, General Amos had to admit, yeah, there's been no negative consequences to getting rid of good order and discipline. So there's just this inertia. But the 2 arguments they try to make is that commanders are responsible for everything that happened in a unit, so therefore they have to have prosecution authority, and commanders set standards, therefore they have to be able to enforce them. Well, the standards of we're dealing with rape, sexual assault, and murder is set by Congress. They're not set by a commander. Congress has set a standard that rape is punishable by life in prison. There's no standard that a commander sets that makes that higher. They're not enforcing their own standard. This is a congressionally mandated, societally mandated standard. Second, it's even within the military, there's a very shallow understanding of the military justice system. So you'll often hear people say, well, commanders have to enforce, you know, discipline. But as we talk about, when it comes to prosecution, it's only a few commanders that can do this. There's 14,500 commanders. 97% of them don't have the authority to send a case to a felony level case trial. And they are the commanders that have the most influence on discipline because they are the commanders that the service member sees. So it's a red herring argument as far as I'm concerned, but that's their other main argument. The other argument is, well, in combat zones, commanders have to be able to discipline people in combat zones. Well, the thing to remember is that due process rights do not go away simply because a crime occurs in a combat zone. An accused that is court-martialed still has a right to an attorney. You have to have a judge. If they demand a jury, you still have to have a jury. You have to bring prosecutors, defense counsel, court reporter. There's nothing unique about a combat zone situation that says only a commander can make a prosecution decision versus a prosecutor. All those moving parts of justice have to be in the combat zone to have justice there. But that's their main arguments.
Yeah, well, thank you. I have a million more questions, but so do the audience, both on Zoom and on Facebook. So I'm going to have Anne, I think, or no, Julia. Have Julia first ask a little question from the chat.
Oh, thank you so much, and thank you guys for what you guys are doing. This is really important, and just giving us a better understanding of how we can work on this with you. Do you have like a besides? I love your Senate page with all where people stand. Or do you have talking points or a sample script that people can use to reach out to their congresspeople on this issue?
We do. If you go on that pledge campaign and you click into there comes up a sample statement of what you can say, and to reach out. And of course, as I said, we mean it when we say we're available to if you want to fine tune anything or know, or if you're unclear on how to proceed or what to do in that respect.
That's great. And what's the timeline? That's one question that we've been hearing in the chat quite a lot. Is what is the timeline?
Well, Senator Gillibrand's talking about reintroducing the bill as a standalone bill sometime in April. Don, if you've heard any newer information about that since I last talked to them, let me know.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything more recently. I don't know if they're waiting to see what the IRC is recommending as well.
Yeah, I don't think they are. I think they're going to push forward. I mean, the great thing about Senator Gillibrand is year after year, even when it was going to be tough for us to pass, she doggedly fought to get a vote on it each year to help us and help herself and others keep bringing attention to the issue and keep pressing members to support it. So we've been able to build this support over years because of we've had those opportunities each time. So the time is imminent, and it's important to help. Senator Gillibrand is going around and quietly collecting co-sponsors, of which they'll announce when they announce the legislation, and all those who've signed on to it. And as I said, we've got to get over the hump. We've got to get to 60.
That's right.
And that's what's really critical here.
And you're at 46 now based on what's on this page?
That's what's publicly shown, yes. Now, I have to say we're over that number. And so we're really looking to, I'd say we're probably about 9 away from 60 right now. And so that's an estimate, but we're feeling good about that. And we never know until a vote's taken, but we're feeling good in that respect. So we're getting close.
Excellent.
That says that really looking at that list, that everybody and Democrats abroad and all their friends and family, looking at that list and picking out those senators, every single one of them is going to make a difference. So I'm hopeful that we can help. We like to push things over the top, right? So Anne, I think
yes, there's so many questions. There's so many questions pouring in. It's hard to decide which one to field to you all, but here's one. Do you think that having more women rising in the ranks of the top leadership positions in the military will make a difference? For example, any of the 140 that Colonel Christensen referenced, I wonder if any of them are women. And have any high-ranking military women stepped forward to endorse the Gillibrand legislation?
A number of women. Yeah, Don, you can tell. Yeah, why don't you go first and then I'll.
Yes, a number of women generals, retired generals have stepped forward and supported it. Not as many as we'd hope, because a lot of generals and admirals know that politically it's within the DoD community, it's not within their career interest to do it. But we have some, including some on our board of advisors who have done that. As far as the 140, what percentage, it probably is around maybe 2 to 3% of those are women. About 16% of the DoD right now are women, but as you increase in the ranks, that percentage goes down. Now, there has been a commitment from Secretary Austin to increase the number of women at higher levels. But if you look at the 4-star generals and admirals, I believe there are 2 that are women, and there are about, I believe we're probably around 60 4-star admirals and generals in all the DoD. So it's just a small percentage. Yeah, and the question, do I think it will help? I'm sorry, Nancy.
No,
I think as the number of women increase, I think it will help for a number of reasons. One, I think as women see other women in those roles and they're not the lone woman in that position, I think it gives them the ability to speak out more and how they really feel. I think right now there's a very much, especially at the higher rank, a pressure to fit in. And so I think it's very difficult for the one woman that's in a 4-star billet to buck the system too much. So we need to get more women so they have more people backing them up. I'll turn it over to Nancy.
Yeah, well, and just like in Congress, the more women in Congress have changed the type of issues we look at, how we look to solutions, more diversity, same thing. And so one of the things that this commission is doing and what we're pushing on this whole command and culture side of this is ensuring, and we did a study with Deloitte about the sort of a state of how of women's experiences in the military, and we dealt with promotions and lack thereof, and with both people of color and women. And so that is another issue that this commission is tackling, is how to improve that as well. So it has to go hand in hand. We have to change both pieces at once. We have to change the justice system. We have to change the culture, the way in which women are viewed in the military too hostilely by too many. And so I think we're tackling it all here at this moment.
So Paula, I was going to ask you a question, and that is, when a man or a woman have this experience within the military, what is the state of resources for them? And I mean, I imagine it's changed over the years a little bit, but maybe not. But in terms of not just the immediate after effects, but is there a support system?
Well, that's it's an interesting dynamic in the military that because it's so specific just to the military, that when you are the victim of a crime, you have your immediate support system is your chain of command. So if you contrast that with a civilian who worked at Walmart and was raped by her manager at Walmart, she wouldn't go to Walmart leadership, the general manager of the store. She would call the police. And in the military, that's really not the dynamic. And it's all completely contained within the chain of command. And that was obviously, the biggest problem I faced and that victims still face today. What is changing is that because of the Protect Our Defenders advocacy, and because that it is becoming so much more of a cultural issue in our country and in the military, that victims are now understanding that they do have recourse, they do have the opportunity to reach out outside of their chain of command. And like I kind of equate it to mandatory reporters within the school system who have the onus or the responsibility when they are made aware of a crime against a child. That teacher is a mandatory reporter to the to protect the child through the obvious agencies. In the military, we don't have it codified that there's a mandatory reporter. So what we have is a lot more awareness of sexual assault prevention programs, and a lot more awareness for very young people in the chain of command have it the most difficult on where to find those resources. But as we keep pushing this awareness into the military through our work, even the youngest and most vulnerable within the military now are more aware that they have recourse within, not exactly within their chain of command, but with other resources through support resources on base and through different programs that handle sexual assault through the counseling centers. And you know, unfortunately, awareness is our biggest tool in helping young people or any military member understand that they need to be aware that they do have recourse, and to be oppressed by their chain of command and actually try and get talked out of making a report or talked out of making a phone call to a 1-800 hotline, which is now becoming a very useful tool throughout the military if you've experienced sexual harassment or sexual assault. The victimization and victim blaming is what really, in my opinion, limits people from finding those resources. They are oppressed by their immediate chain of command in their working environment, that somehow they caused what happened to them. So to answer your question about whether we have the resources and whether they're expanding, yes, they are. And it really comes through in outreach to military members that they and are not the cause of the crime that happened to them. And social media is huge. It's become a tremendous tool in empowering victims that there are resources. But to answer the question exactly, I would actually ask Nancy if she wanted to dovetail in on what we've been able to offer in the way of.
Thanks, Paula. Well, I'll first, and also I know there's lots of questions, so we'll try to be briefer to get more through as many as we can. Or if there's some after, please feel to send them to us. But within the military, there aren't enough. They have enough money. They haven't applied it well to really give support. And besides that, when too often the go-to is retaliate, get rid of the problem, the victim, kick them out. That's been the problem. So we've got to change that dynamic. And I would say that what we've seen from Secretary Austin thus far anyway, is showing us he's aware of that and he's looking at all levels. And that's what this commission is on behalf of the president to recommend changes. It's not just accountability and command and culture, but also prevention and response. And so they're looking at the whole thing. So I am hopeful about that.
Great. And I think we are running into time. So I'm going to have, let's see, I think we'll have Erin and then Angela each have a question.
All right, thank you. So you were previously talking a little bit about awareness, and I know that shows like Law and Order SVU have brought awareness about rape culture and such to the wider population. And there have been some shows like The Good Wife and Scandal, which have sort of touched on the concept of military justice, but not gotten very in depth with it. Do you think shows like this help bring awareness in a positive way, or are they really doing more harm than good?
Well, and NCIS, right, Don? And go ahead.
Yeah, I very briefly, I would say anything that brings awareness is good as long as it's factually accurate. You know, one of the problems we have as a prosecutor is there's an unrealistic expectation of what an investigation will turn up. So if people watch NCIS, you know, crimes quickly solved. There's always DNA evidence. There's always digital evidence that proves somebody's guilt beyond reasonable doubt. You know, reality is there's rarely ever DNA evidence. There's rarely good digital evidence. You sometimes have it and you're a prosecutor, hey, great, but usually you're dealing with a survivor telling what happened to them and convincing a jury beyond reasonable doubt that that is true. So don't give us an unrealistic look at the issue because that hurts.
And of course, though, Aaron, to you, obviously these shows tended to that, but I will just say that our communications director, Brian Perchia, would say, but he's always pushing, and Scandal and some of these others, we have worked with them behind the scenes, provided them information, and their storylines have been some of our work. So we push every way we know how.
Angela?
Thank you for doing what you're doing. It's very well needed. I used to work for the military as a civilian, and I remember once I was working late and one of my coworkers came in the office and said, "Hey, what are you doing here so late?" And I said, "I just have some work to finish up." And they're like, "You should not be here alone." And I said, "I'm not alone. I'm with the soldiers." And they said, "Well, they'd be the ones raping you." And I thought, okay, that's very blunt, you know, but so thank you. Nothing ever happened to me working for the military, thank God. But we have a couple of questions about whistleblowers that I'd kind of like to tie together. How do you protect whistleblowers from harm and revenge? And in terms of whistleblower protection, do you think the laws have improved in the past decade?
Don, you want to take that?
Yeah, so that's a huge problem. The military likes to control the narrative. They will often tell survivors that they can't talk to the media without their permission, which is absolutely not true, but that's what they do. Retaliation is a huge problem within the military. Year after year after year, the surveys show that over 60% of men and women who report retaliated against. One of the best things that good whistleblower legislation does is provide a financial disincentive against whoever's doing the retaliation by allowing the whistleblower to make a complaint, but it's very difficult for military members to do that. Civilian employees can, but there's simply not enough protection. And so the other problem is there's so many subtle ways to retaliate against a military member that it's difficult for someone on the outside to understand. So our entire careers, especially if you're an officer, is influenced by your performance report, your annual performance report. And there are ways to write those that would sound good to somebody who didn't know anything about them. It makes it sound like, oh, you really like this guy. But if key words or phrases are missing, that is a death knell to your career. And it's very easy for somebody to just not put those words into your performance report, and now your career is over. So not enough being done to protect whistleblowers, and Paula definitely knows the impact of that.
Okay.
Paula, you're muted. Did you want to say something? Paula?
Can you hear me now? Okay. I was just going to dovetail onto that very briefly. in the informal and formal ways that the chain of command can sabotage your career is just endless. But in often when somebody does come forward with a complaint, one of the questions I saw was, can they be transferred to another job, another location? And a lot of times when the victim is transferred just to get her away from the perpetrator or get him away from the perpetrator, that completely disrupts their military career path. So that in itself becomes sabotaging. And then eventually we see victims that lose their that are discharged because in a retaliatory nature, they are discharged with a personality disorder, and then they lose their security clearance, and they leave the military with a less than honorable discharge that it follows them for the rest of their life. I left the military. I stayed in for 4 years after Tailhook, and it almost killed me. I left, I bolted out the door, got no military retirement, no healthcare, no nothing, just left after 10 years of service. And it was a matter of life and death. What happens in my case now and in other whistleblowers, I have no career recourse. I mean, somebody Googles me, I'm out. I'm a whistleblower. So, and I came through this better than most young people. Young people have so much more pressure on them now, leaving the military. So the protections for whistleblowers is something that we always are trying to keep in place. But until the law changes and someone who is a victim of sexual assault or sexual harassment can't sue their military employer. So, and that's really the impetus for change in the civilian world, is a big fat lawsuit. So that I just wanted to point out again, the military justice system continues to victimize well after you leave the military because of those loopholes.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you all so much. I'm going to turn it over to Anne to just
Okay,
close
my goodness.
it down.
Yeah, we could go on and on and on. It's a very serious problem, but I do feel better having heard all of this. And thank you. I think we all understand now that we have our marching orders from you. We're going to check out your website. We're going to go check out our own senators and representatives and make a lot of noise. Very soon. You've given us a timeline as well, so we thank you for that very much. So thank you so much, Nancy, Paula, and Dawn, for sharing your insights with us. I hope all of you who've been listening have enjoyed this discussion as much as I have, and I've been so moved. It's really quite incredible. But as I said, I feel fired up too. I know what to do now. You've given us some tools, and I really, really appreciate that. All right, so our next GWC panel discussion will be exactly 1 week from today in this same time slot at April 13th, 12 noon Eastern. We'll be talking to Professor Linda Scott about women's economic development and empowerment, which is also part of the puzzle. The week after that, we'll be talking climate. If you haven't signed up yet, you can follow the link in the chat box and find out more about these and other Women's Caucus events. We'd love to see you there. And in closing, I'd like to give a great big shout out to Marnie, who's put this together for us, and to our amazing guests, and to Angela and Aaron and Julia for supporting us with all of their expertise. And I'd like to thank all our volunteers out there and let you know that we'd love to have you on our team too. So please consider joining us. Our join link is in the chat box. But for now, we'll say goodbye. We'll do the work that we've been assigned to do by our guests, and we'll have to close the call. So thank you very much. And we hope we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Anne.
Thank you, Anne.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
We're ending the live stream. I'm stopping the recording.
Oh, thank you guys. That was really terrific.
It was wonderful. We really appreciate it.